So in this segment, we're going to be discussing Brexit. The EU may have moved on, but the UK remains trapped in a doom cycle. Found this one quite interesting. So 6 years after the referendum and 3 years after the UK left the EU, the bloc has settled comfortably in its new life without its British member. There are occasionally twinges of regret at the loss of the island nation that once brought a stream of practicality and diplomatic finesse to the European project. I mean, did we? We scuppered the India deal, so I don't know if that's true. But mostly the EU has moved on, like a wife has rediscovered the joys of life after the wayward exit. By contrast, after flouncing out, Britain is still obsessed with the relationship. Its politics are trapped in a doom cycle, forever haunted by the EU. The neurosis is not reciprocated in Brussels or other capitals. It really does feel like that. The EU are focusing on Ukraine, the green subsidy battle with the US, and internal countries like Poland and Hungary. Whilst we are debating the damage of Brexit and the government are trying to spin everything as just global factors, the UK is still trying to figure out what to do, debating over bills like the EU deregulation bill and the Windsor framework. We are so lost right now, unable to deal with the problems, with Ukraine being a main outlier. But when it comes to the sanctions, we were lacking. We were lacking bad. We might have tried to sanction more people, but the speed that we did it was very slow. And with liquid assets, they can move out real quick. This mismatch is partly due to strategic choices. While Brexit tore through the British body politic, the EU moved quickly to isolate the problem and cauterise the wound. The continuing sores that still dog relations, including the UK's threat to unilaterally scrap its post-Brexit treaty with the EU over trade with Northern Ireland, have been shunted to the margins, with leaders and ministers happy to let it be handed to the relatively low-profile European Commission President Maroš Šefčovič. I mean, I disagree with that. You know, the idea that Šefčovič is some low-key minister in the commission doesn't make any sense. He's one of the top dons that's there. The vice president's not some noob role, but he's their chief negotiator, I believe. You know, he's out there dealing with Switzerland. So, you know, clearly I don't think this journalist has done too much research in that regard. You know, the EU prepared by getting more customs officials, building up their infrastructure. You know, the EU deals with third countries and has a range of ports of entry to the EU. So, you know, the EU has options when it comes to the UK. The EU has had the level of checks needed and had everything in place to deal with Brexit, like putting in the final piece in a game of Connect 4, you know, ready from the jump, a game I lose very often to my younger brother, embarrassing. Whereas the UK's lost, you know, Gove said we needed 50,000 customs officers, but we did not get anywhere near that. You know, Gove was very quiet on how many we have. We kept delaying doing full import checks on EU goods for over a year and a half. Despite building more facilities to do the checks, we decided in the end not to do that to the checks because it would cost too much to the imports and add too much time to imports as well. Now we're stuck with white elephant projects, and they cost the taxpayers a lot at the national and local level. It also helps that the most fervent Brexiteers are now clearly associated with the chaos domestic politics. The past year's turmoil was seen as another warning about the perils of leaving the EU. When we look at the Brexiteer ministers that have been marked as clowns, there's a few, but not a ton. Braverman for sure, maybe a few others, but the ones that flip from Remain to Brexit, like Truss, have been outed as clowns too. People like Baker have not really been associated with the chaos as much, in my opinion anyways. I think, if anything, he's kind of been shown to be a more reformed character. Johnson would be another one where we saw endless chaos with him, even now as former Prime Minister, we're still seeing it, but I'd argue we always knew Johnson was a clown, but clearly Britain wanted a circus. Prime Minister Sunak may be a Leave voter, but he has recognised the folly of the feverish railing against Brussels by his two predecessors. The threats to trigger a disastrous trade war were never really likely to work, and he's expected to quietly agree a deal on Northern Ireland next year. And I would say it's not been quiet, it's been pretty loud. Him killing off the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, the one to stop checks in the RSC, has been pretty quiet. That one, yeah. Some Tories like Johnson and Truss complained, but it's been pretty muted. So I'd argue that, you know, Sunak was desperate for an optics win and he got it. However, the main reason for the EU's confidence lies elsewhere. The bloc has been buffeted by extraordinary challenges in recent years, of which Brexit was just one. Others include the economic crisis of the 2010s, the twin crises in 2015 over migrants, asylum seekers, and Greece's place in the euro, and the coronavirus pandemic. More recently, perhaps the biggest test of all is the war of Ukraine, and the events could have torn the EU apart. There was no guarantee that the member states would hold together, but they did, and they're stronger for it. It's not to say the EU has dealt with all the crises that well. but sometimes having experience with the crisis does help. We'll look at each one listed. The Eurozone crisis, in which the EU allowed the UK an opt-out in order to get the bailouts done, I think was fine. I can't remember too much about it, but I remember it was there. People said it was embarrassing for Britain, but, we didn't have to pay any money in, so I don't see where the embarrassment lies. I know Greece was a basket case, but the level of austerity and privatisation forced on them was ridiculous. The bailouts were not just done to help Greece, but to bail out bankers and investors who lent way too much money to Greece. More countries supported austerity back in that era, which led to a lot of issues. People keep citing countries that have come out of austerity and claim it's a success. Those people don't understand economics. It takes spending for an economy to grow. People in the bottom and middle need disposable income. If austerity is way less strict from, back then, those economies would be in a much stronger position. Look at what 12 years of austerity has done to Britain. It doesn't work. And fundamentally, when you go on to privatise things, you've lost those national assets. So tell me, how does selling off a port help your country? It doesn't make any sense. Quote, Ukraine has opened the EU's eyes to the fact that there are lots of big boys in the world and they have to play at the same level. End quote, says Camino Morata Martinez, head of the Brussels office at the Centre of European Reform. Quote, it has given the EU confidence and brought it together more than anything else, and it is the first time that the EU has found a crisis that fits it well, end quote. European President von der Leyen, who coordinated the EU's response, said in October that Ukraine had brought the bloc together. Quote, we are united in support of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. We are united in our resolve to defend our shared values, end quote, she said. The war has united the bloc against the common enemy. Hungary, being a bit of an outlier, seems torn on what to do regarding how hard to go against Russia. Meanwhile, Germany is still struggling to stop using as much Russian fossil fuel, but at least it's trying. Overall, the EU has thrown a lot of support behind Ukraine and led to countries looking to procure supplies as a bloc rather than as individuals, which has really helped them when it comes to things like vaccines, and I think it will help them with regards to resupplying their armaments that they've given away to Ukraine. I think the NATO requirements to have more standardised gear has really helped the EU a lot. Overall, it's given the EU a bit more of a purpose and shows that together they are more effective and that over time they can convince each other on what's the right thing to do. Germany was very hesitant on sending arms to Ukraine initially, but now they've finally let the leopards free. While leading the fight for his country's survival, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky signed his country's application to join the EU in May, saying, quote, if Ukraine does join, it could make the EU an even more powerful force, end quote, he said. The newfound unity will be put to the test in 2023. Winter will be one challenge, while internally Hungary's autocratic national leader Viktor Orban may retreat further into his role as the EU's gadfly. And although Ukraine has gained momentum in the war, victory cannot be assumed. But for the moment, the EU is in a role and is standing up for itself and making its presence matter. Winter is almost up, despite the late snowstorm, the big flurry. Poland and Hungary will continue to be challenges, and I can see the EU struggling to deal with them. I don't think the EU is really built to deal with rogue member states. The EU are probably hoping that elections will change things in those countries, and the threats of withholding funds will convince Poland and Hungary to change tactics. The EU dealt with the UK pretty well though. Northern Ireland was always going to be a big question mark for me, but the EU have negotiated in good faith and given the UK the optics wins, but have stood firmly in what they wanted, keeping the border open on the island of Ireland and protecting the Good Friday Agreement whilst keeping their single market protected for the most part. Pretty decent job so far considering they were dealing with the UK, which is a nightmare to deal with on the best of days. But overall, I think there's some things that the author missed on this one. But I think with the EU kind of working more as a bloc with procurement of vaccines, and I think they'll continue to look at that model of procurement. They did have issues initially with kind of Hungary using the Russian vaccine, but they said if you want to use it, that's fine. Just keep it within your own country. I think they should just said don't export it out or don't expect special treatment because you've used the Russian vaccine. I'd have to go back and relook at that. But they dealt with individual member states' needs as well as dealing with the groups, and it was effective. They got a massive discount on the vaccines compared to us, and in the end, their rollout was more effective than ours. So credit where it's due, I guess. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.